Recording started.
All right, aloha again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Leveraging Resources. Today is July 31st, 2014. This webinar is being presented by the Pacific Region TTA Center, and it is a resource of the Administration for Native Americans. In the Pacific, we at the TTA Center handle all of the training and technical assistance in our region, which includes Guam, American Samoa, Saipan, Rota, Tinian, and Hawaii. And so our office is based on the island of Oahu in Pearl City. And you can find out more about our office by visiting our website, anapacificbasin.org. And all of our resources are free, including this webinar. And so if you have any questions about ANA grants, how to apply, forming a project, anything like that, or if you just want to brainstorm, then please contact us, and we'd be happy to help you. And there's also regional offices in the west side of the U.S., the east, and in the Alaska region, and we'd be happy to refer you to those as well. ANA, the Administration for Native Americans, is the agency that's providing this national webinar. ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations, which includes Native Hawaiians, Chamorros, Alaska Natives, and other Native Pacific Islanders, as well as Native American tribes. And ANA's vision, their ultimate goal is that all Native communities are thriving. And so until that is accomplished, they will continue working towards that goal. And you can learn more about ANA by visiting the website there on the screen, www.acf.hhs.gov/program/ANA. And so today's webinar, July 31st, is the last for this month. Every Thursday, ANA produces a national webinar. And it always has something to do with community-based projects in Native communities. So a really good resource. Next week, let's see, on August 7th, which I guess is not next week, there's going to be a session on creating business plans to generate project income. On August 14th, the relationship between revenue generation and nonprofit status. And on August 21st, there'll be a session on creating an ancillary organization to expand and support operations. So all really good topics coming up in August, especially if you're an organization that could use more money, especially between grants. And I think that is, that's the case with most of us. And so you can register for those events by going to the events page of the ANA website, which is at the ANA website, and click on events. All right, and so before we get started, I see that at least one person is having trouble with audio, and so another thing that we'll need to use later on during the Q&A section is the raise hand button, which if you look in the participants box, it looks like a little open hand. And so when I click it, next to my name, Pacific Region, in that box, it has a little raised hand. So if you can hear me now, could you please click on that raised hand button to let me know that, that you have audio. Awesome, cool. That's most of you. So right on. And you can click it again to lower your hand. So when we get to the Q&A section, that's how you'll enter the queue, and we'll answer the questions in the order that that the hands were raised. Okay, so today's webinar is all about leveraging resources, and this is something that you can really use to grow what you have by partnering with people, and by getting the most out of what you have now. And so our goals for today are number one, to help you understand the importance of leveraged resources to a successful project. And number two, to teach you practical ways to identify, harness, and track leveraged resources for your community-based project. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to the director in the Pacific region, Keone Nunez, who will be leading today's session. Keone has over a decade worth of experience working with grants, federal grants, and so he can really explain this in detail. So at this time, I'll pass it off to Keone.
Aloha. This is Keone Nunez, and I am the Pacific Regional Director for ANA. And we've wanted to do this webinar because oftentimes one of the things that is asked of us is what is leverage resources, because that's not something that you commonly talk about within your own organization possibly, or within your own daily existence. So this is generally how it is categorized. The term leverage resources means those benefits identified by tribes or nonprofit organizations to supplement the federal grant activities are not part of the federal grant share requirements of the grant, and that are made available to or used in conjunction with the Administration for Native Americans grant. Okay, this is our definition of leverage resources. And it's really important for you to understand that that part that you really need to look at is that section that says are not part of the non-federal share requirements of the grant. For ANA's purposes, the non-federal share is the 20% match. So anything above and beyond the 20% match would be considered leverage resources. Okay? Why are leverage resources important? It validates need for the project, it documents community support for the project, and expands the resources for the project, and supports project sustainability. And that's really important. All of these things are very, very important. And us guys being in the Pacific, sometimes it's easy for us to make certain analogies to things that happen. And I might be using some analogies right now in the Pacific. A huge event that's going on is the around the world sale of our traditional sailing vessel called Hokulea. And the picture that you see is a perfect example of sharing resources. That this is not Hokulea, this is not the voyaging canoe that's currently going around, but this is a canoe called Hawaii Loa. And this was made in conjunction with a partnership from Native Hawaiians and an organization called Sea Alaska. So we might be doing some analogies for voyaging. So I'm going to steer you through this as we voyage on to hopefully smooth sailing. Excuse the puns, but That's just me. Anyway, uh, one of the things that you need to do in order to really understand what leverage resources are is to understand type of leverage resources there are out there. Some of it is grants and contracts. Uh, when Hawaii law was first made, there was a huge grant that was given to the Bishop Museum for the building of the canoe. And so that was the primary grant, but there were all smaller grants that were associated with it. So these smaller grants could be considered leverage resources. For ANA's purposes, if you're receiving federal monies, you cannot apply those federal monies for that project as part of your 20% match. But you can apply those resources as part of your leverage resources. The next thing that you can look at is services. Services are oftentimes overlooked because we kind of take it for granted, yeah. So whatever services that come to your organization that is above and beyond that 20% match can be considered leverage resources. One of the services that was given to the Hawaii law was the transportation of the canoe after it was done. And this type of service was really important, and this was done pretty much at no cost to the organization because this was a partnership with a company that was used to moving sea vessels. So that's really important to understand, that services sometimes are overlooked as part of leverage resources. The other thing that should be looked upon as possibilities for leverage resources are goods. Any type of donations that you guys get for your project, and no matter how small that donation is, you can count that for your leverage resources. Again, this is contingent upon the fact that you're not counting it as part of your 20% match. And the fourth thing is facilities and equipment. Yeah. And so in the building of the Hawaii Loa canoe, it was built on the grounds of the Bishop Museum. And so the Bishop Museum actually donated the facilities in which they were working at. The canoe maker, Wright Bowman, had some of the very specific equipment that was utilized in making the canoes. And although his expertise was paid for, his equipment was his donation to the project. And that could have been used as a leverage resource. Okay, the types of leverage resources, we're going to get into a little bit more detail with this, yeah? So grants, contracts, and donations. Again, like how I said, grants and contracts from other federal agencies can be used as part of your leverage resources. Grants and contracts from the state can be used. Now, all of these below the federal agencies are actually contingent upon whether or not it is considered part of the 20% match or not. If it is not considered part of the 20% match, then it would be eligible for being a leverage resource. Okay, grants and contracts from foundations. So if you're getting any type of foundation monies that you're not including with your 20% match, that will work. Grants and contracts from corporations. Grants and contracts from individuals, cash donations from individuals. Oftentimes we overlook this, but the cash donations, if not going directly to the 20% match, can be used as part of your leverage resources. And cash donations from corporations. All of these are under that category of grants / contracts and donations as part of a category for leverage resources. The type of leverage resources is pretty much, again, we're looking at different types, and we're going to look at also services. Now, the services that your board members put into the organization, those services, it could be something like choosing your director. If they're doing it as part of their own donation, if you will, to the project, then that can be utilized as leverage resources. Yeah. Sometimes, especially for organizations that have the 20% match, and there are many, many organizations out there that can use a 20% match. And remember, for ANA's purposes, the 20% match can be either cash or in-kind services. And so for many of you out there, you have the 20% match already. So if you have the 20% match, then you have to be strategic in figuring out what kind of leverage resources are you going to tap into, because it's very, very important, as we said earlier, to identify these leverage resources, because it does give you a really, really good idea of the community support for the project. And we found that with more partnerships and more leverage resources, the project, after completing the federal grants, are much, much more successful if they have very strong leverage resources and very strong community support. Okay. The other type of services would be eligible would be advisory committee members. Again, the advisory committee members can offer a certain type of expertise that you're not counting within your 20% match. Some of this type of expertise might be very specific. If you have an advisory committee, then they probably are put together because they have certain skills that are pertinent to the project that you're doing. And so in best utilizing the skills, you might want to consider it as part of leverage resources as opposed to the 20% match. Volunteers, again, for many projects, there are a lot of people who are willing to volunteer. For Hawaii Law, there are so many people that were willing to volunteer their time. And if it was an ANA project, then we would have an overabundance of work hours given to the canoe. And that work hours, possibly some of it would have been used for the 20% match, but definitely it would have gone above and beyond that. And so that would have been utilized as part of the leverage resources. And professional services. Any type of professional services is welcome to be part of the leverage resources. We have a question for Kapono. Can we leverage members who are actively a part of advisory committee but also contracted to the project? Can they play a dual role? Now that's really touchy, because if they're contracted to the project, then you are utilizing them for a certain skill set. Now, you can utilize them as part of leverage if the skill set is kind of different. This is one of the areas that, again, when you're doing leverage resources, when you're doing any type of project, you want to make very, very certain that every single person's role is clearly defined. And if you can clearly define the dual role and not show any type of overlap, because the federal government is going to look for double dipping. You can't necessarily say that you're going to contract somebody and count that type of skill set as part of the leverage resources. And so that's going to be really important in putting your project together and putting the roles and responsibilities of each member that's going to play a role in part of that project. Then you really need to clearly define who's going to do what and where. Now, the leverage resources, if it's not part, if their contribution is not part of what they're contracted to do, then quite possibly you could see that division. If it becomes really muddied, then I would say to clarify that and make it really known what their role is and why you're going to utilize them for both roles. Yeah, I know that's kind of an iffy question, but at the same time, you know, those type of situations are situations that you kind of want to avoid if possible, because you want to have really clearly defined roles within the project. Okay, the types of leverage resources: goods, office supplies, arts and crafts supplies, refreshments for meetings with community members. For many organizations, although ANA, you can put refreshments within your budget. For many other government contracts or government grants, excuse me, you cannot include food, and so refreshments for meetings with community members is important. Farm products, seedlings and things of that nature, training materials, musical instruments, youth activity supplies, school supplies, all of these things. You know, there was one organization that was doing a farm type of project in Hawaii, and one of the things was we were asked to go out because it seemed like they were not reporting their leverage resources correctly because they didn't have very much to report. When we went out there, one of the things that that we noticed is that they had some chicken coops, and these were old chicken coops. The farm itself was on part of the land in which they used to raise chickens on a commercial basis. And guess what they had? They had chicken manure. And we asked if they were utilizing the chicken manure in the farm, and they said yes. And so that was a leverage resource that they did not count upon. So those type of things you really gotta look at. Now, when we did the Hawaii Law Canoe, there was a lot of things that was needed. One of the things that was needed the most was rope material, because the canoe was lashed on together. It's lashed together. It's not held together by nails. And so there was a partnership with one of the marine suppliers to supply some of the rope necessary to put the canoe together. Now, this was really important, because if we didn't have the rope necessary, then we couldn't put the canoe together. And so that would have been a huge leverage resource for us. Yeah. Jilla has a question. Does the leverage resources have to be eligible for the grant? Like food is not eligible, but if it is a leverage resource, can it count? Does it count and ANA accepts it? Well, for ANA, food is eligible. Yeah, so that's not an issue. But if we look at something that may not be eligible, now the majority of, again, the focus for ANA grants is to provide services for Native communities. Now, if you had volunteers who are non-Native, who might not be eligible, then, and in many cases that happens, then you could count, and you're not, again, the clear line is that you're not utilizing their volunteer hours as part of your 20% match, then it can count for your leverage resources. Yeah, and so in that sense, the person was not eligible, but the skill level that they were providing is eligible. So you have to look at it like that. Yeah. Again, for ANA, food is eligible within your line item budget or within your 20% match, or you could utilize it as a leverage resource depending on how you go about doing it. Okay, another one of the types of leverage resources is facilities and equipment, and I had told you a little bit about some of the services that was provided for the Hawaii Loa Canoe as far as transportation is concerned. Now, for Hawaii Loa, the equipment necessary, if you look at the above picture, the equipment necessary to lower the canoe into water is very, very specific. It's not something that you can go down the road and ask your neighbor for. And so there were partnerships with the people who not only owned the equipment but ran the equipment, so that we could take the canoe and lower it back into the water. Again, this was a partnership, and they never charged the organization for it, because it was understood that this was very important for the entire state of Hawaii, and it was very, very expensive to do that. So there was a partnership, and definitely this would have been an excellent, excellent way of fulfilling either your 20% match or bumping up your leverage resource, because it was very, very specific and it was necessary for the project to get off the docks, yeah, to get into the water. And so that's really important. Office space can be utilized for leverage resources, even furniture, a classroom, a recreational facility, land, farmland, or land for gardening or something like that can be utilized as leverage resources. A training facility, a vehicle, computer, copier machine, or computer, all of these things fall into the facilities and equipment category of leverage resources. So it's really important for you to need to understand what categories these things fall upon, and put them in the category that is really important for you to keep tabs on what kind of leverage resources you're getting. Kamalani has a question: do we need to disclose our leverage resources when we apply for the grant? That is, do we need to anticipate these needs before I apply? No, you do not. The leverage resources pretty much only comes into fruition after you get your project. And so we're not asking you really to predict the future, if you will. You don't know what type of leverage resources you're going to end up with. You have an idea of what kind of partnerships you have going into the project, but you might not know what type of leverage resources are going to be available to you at that particular time. Okay, the documentation of leverage resources. This is very important because, you know, this is one of the things that are is going to be necessary for you to be able to successfully account for all of your leverage resources. Yeah. Before I get into that, we have a question for Rita. She said, can an employee's personal laptop be considered equipment? Again, you got to look at it and make it clear cut. If the employee needs the laptop to fulfill their position, to fulfill what they're doing, then it would be essential for the employee to supply that. Because how is the employee going to fulfill whatever they need if you don't give them the appropriate equipment? Yeah. When you're using personal equipment, I would be very, very cautious with that, because personal equipment, there's so much gray areas as far as that's concerned. What happens if they're using their personal computer for work, then it gets damaged? Who is going to be liable for that? Yeah, or are they going to hold the company or the project liable to that? And if they are going to hold a company liable for that, or the project liable for that, then what kind of guarantees do you have to ensure that it's going to be utilized for work? You know, so again, that's kind of like a gray area that I would not cross. I would not ask an employee to use their laptop as part of the 20% match or the leverage resources. And that would probably include all other personal equipment. Yeah. If it's personal, if it's from your employees, you know, and it's necessary for you to utilize to successfully complete your project, I would say the project is, it's important for the project to pick up those pieces of equipment. And for A&A, that's fine. You know, you can include computer costs and things like that for your A&A project. So I would not want to see you go into that gray area. Yeah. Okay. It's important that written procedures be established for documentation of leverage resources. You have to have some sort of protocol that will allow you to take that leverage resources and put it into a dollar amount. Yeah, because oftentimes you don't know. The chicken manure is a real easy thing. You know, the equipment that was used to lower the Hawaii law is real easy because we know exactly how much it costs. Whereas with chicken manure, you know, you got to go out and find out the cost, possibly, as far as that's concerned. Volunteer hours, again, those type of things are contingent upon what they're doing. If it's specialized work, then maybe their volunteer hours are a little bit more. You would be able to charge a little bit more for what they're doing, or you would be able to claim a little bit more. I shouldn't say charge, but to claim a little bit more for what they're doing because it's specialized work. And so I think it's important to have those written procedures. So, and as far as the organization is concerned, it just makes a lot of sense for the organization, because then you can have a real good idea of what's going on with your organization, how much you're working up towards the 20% match that A&A is requiring, and how much is over that 20% match to utilize as leverage resources. And we do have some forms that we're going to share with you guys at the end of the webinar that will give you an idea of how to do this. Yeah. Okay. Again, having a procedure for documenting leverage resources, this tells you why. The purpose is to really identify why the procedure is important. As far as this is concerned, yeah, why is it important? Why do we need to do that? It gives you details as to who is responsible for the documentation, what information each person has to collect, aggregate, or report, yeah, and any information about the procedure that you want to include, such as frequency of reports and who receives the reports. And the forms will be used to document the leverage resources. Again, this is really necessary because of all of those reasons. The frequency of reports and things of that nature, especially if you're going to aggregate the information, is really important. I would say that you aggregate the information and you put it on either a quarterly or biannual basis for you to be able to utilize that with your quarterly or biannual report. And so that's something that you have to look at as an organization and see what works for you within your project. How to identify potential leverage resources. There are certain things that we're going to share with you today. Again, we have some tools for you, and you need to be able to, the question before was, in essence, do we have to foresee what kind of leverage resources we're going to get? Okay, and the answer is no, you don't need to, but it's a good idea when you're looking at your project to start to identify all the resources in your communities and the resources outside of the communities, and what kind of resources not only are you going to utilize in the project, but can possibly assist with the project. And this might be sort of specific, or it could be something that is not often thought of, and for every project it's sort of different. For one of the things that that was not often done was for the Hawaii law, we needed to have a ceremony that put it into the water. And so everything associated with that ceremony was very specific, but it didn't run through the entire course of the project. It only came about towards the ending part of the project. Yeah, but we needed to start looking at the available resources before the end of the project, because if we waited too long, then we might not have the appropriate materials and individuals necessary so that the ceremonies for the launching could have gone without a hitch. Yeah. So we have over here a form, and it says assessing available resources. And within the assessing available resources, what you will see is that, and you can change categories. These are just an example, and we'll send this with you, and you can erase the ones that you don't need. So one of the resources is the Department of Labor. It's a human resource, and the benefits to a potential project is work experience. So we are going to look at the work experience of the staff to provide tutoring. Yeah, so that's a potential. Another potential is a program person. And that program person that we've identified is none other than our illustrious training coordinator, Napua Harabato. And her benefit to the project would be curriculum on traditional plants. Little known fact, she has delved into a lot of traditional plants and knows a lot of things about them. So if any of you are out there who want to identify a plant, just give Napua a call on her own time, though, of course. Then the other thing is to list resources available outside the community. One of the resources that is listed is the Flynn Foundation, and they can provide classroom facility. Again, you start doing this with all of the resources that you are looking at, not only in your community, but outside your community. And this provides a running list of the type of resources available to you. Yeah. Now, sometimes you come into an understanding that there are stronger relationships with certain individuals or certain resources, I should say, than with others. And this is a good way of looking at how you can really map this. Yeah, how to identify your potential resources is to evaluate your current working relationship and communication with each resource. And again, these will be available to you at the end of the webinar. But you can see partially that the ANA project has a strong relationship with the State Department of Labor. Or excuse me, they do not have any communication with the State Department of Labor. And so there needs to be some communication for this particular project. Yeah. And you start and develop and implement a plan for strengthening that working relationship, to strengthen those working relationships that are non-existent or weak, and to continue the working relationships you have with the resources that you know you're going to have to utilize within your project. So these things are very, very important. And this is just two ways of doing it. You can do it in your own way also, but you need to start identifying resources, yeah. Okay, one thing that you really need to do, especially with your partnerships and with the people that are giving their time and effort, and the organizations, you've got to be generous with your shout outs. You've got to be generous with acknowledging all of their really important contributions. And you know, one of the things, the simplest things to be done is to name names. But of course, before you do this, make sure that you have permission from that resource, whether it's an organization, a business, or an individual, that you can utilize their name publicly, because there are a lot of people that might not want to actually have their name used, because they want to be a little bit more discreet about things. I just realized that I did not answer a question that Gila had. Do you mean that like having a rate for using copy machine or mileage cost for a car already, so that can be included and identified as leverage resources once we use it for the project? You know, no, I wouldn't do that. I would put that as operational cost for the projects, because again, it's something that you need to do to accomplish your project, and so that is an eligible line item budget for the project itself. So I wouldn't use those two examples, copy machines or car mileage costs, for that, because I would include that with the budget necessary to complete the project. Again, leverage resources is things that go above and beyond what is needed, yeah, for the most part. Kamani says, has anyone tried crowdsourcing like Kickstarter for leverage resources above and beyond the required 20%. You know, I am not sure if anybody has done that, not to my knowledge, but also I know that crowdsourcing has certain specific rules that they need to adhere to in order to get the funds. And I don't know what the eligibility with that in doing a project such as this would be. But if it meets all the eligibility and all of that kind of stuff, then it would be, it could fulfill the leverage resource requirements. And yeah, if you do this, please let us know what happens. Yeah. Okay. Getting back to the recognition, you also have to make sure that you embrace the grassroots recognition. You know, put pictures of volunteers, things that are donated, and all of that kind of stuff. Put pictures of it, because, you know, sometimes something as small as that makes a huge amount of difference, not necessarily to the individual that is being pictured, but to the community in which the project is being formulated around. Because the community will start saying that, hey, you know what, these guys are doing well. They're actually acknowledging the people that are helping them. And that brings up huge community support. Capono said that they're using a Kickstarter to support a pop-up Ava bar within the community that our project operates in. That's a real interesting thing, Capono. I'd like to see how that goes. Keep us posted, please, please. Yeah. Okay, the other thing is public project progress reports. One of the things that oftentimes we in our own communities get very angry about is people coming into our communities saying that they're going to do this, then after that we don't hear anything of it. Yeah, don't be like that. In other words, be proactive. Do public project progress reports as much as possible. Now try and say that real fast 3 times. Public project progress reports. And so it's going to be really, really important for you to start being more proactive and working towards acknowledging what's happening with the project, how it's going. Yeah, and that's really important. Publish project goals. Again, be more proactive about letting the people know about what your goals are and all of those things. Don't be afraid of public sourcing. You know, if there's something that you need to support the project, whether it be a service or supply, let your community know. I'm sure that people will flock to it if they know that there is a need. Yeah. Embrace the generosity of others. Use status updates and scorecards to recognize those who have given resources to support the project. This is just some ideas, and celebrate as a team. In the Pacific, we know how to celebrate, but I think it's necessary to celebrate as a team. That includes staff, participants, community members, agencies, funders. Make sure that everybody is around to celebrate the accomplishments. Yeah, just like when we did Hawaii Law, when we lowered Hawaii Law, we sent all kinds of invitations to everyone who was involved, and people, even if they had the smallest contribution to the canoe, was so happy to see what was being done and that they had been included. Okay, we have question and answers right now, and so all you need to do is raise your hand, or as you've been doing, write in your questions into the chat, and that'll be good. Yeah. So is there any questions out there? I think we've kind of been answering questions as they pop up, but for any of you who have any questions or clarifications that you think I could do, just let me know. I'll keep it going for another minute or two, then hand it over to Matt afterwards. Okay. Seeing that, I hope I've done enough to answer some of your questions. So, you know, I hope that's okay. I will hand it back to Matt, and he can take it from here.
All right, thanks, Keone. Okay, so if there are no questions, we will wrap it up. So just to recap, the goals of today's webinar were, number one, to provide you with information. Oh wait, sorry, this is this is not right. Were to help you understand the importance of leverage resources to a successful project, and then just to teach you practical ways to identify, harness, and track leveraged resources. And like Keone said, we have a bunch of handouts for you guys to use. These are tools that you can use to create procedures for your organization, and also to identify resources that you may have in your community, and then to kind of assess the level of communication that you have with each organization or individual that each resource represents. And so the goal with that is to make sure that you're not only utilizing the right resources towards the right goals, but also to keep the relationships with those individuals strong. And we'll be emailing that to everyone who registered for the webinar after we're done. And so just look forward to that email. If you access this webinar without registering for it, then just go back to the registration form right after the webinar is done. Drop your email address in there, and we'll send it out in about an hour. So that's 11 Hawaii time and 5 o'clock East Coast time. Okay, and coming up, once again, we have these webinars in August. Just one correction, the August 21st webinar is now on native languages, so it's actually going to be strategies for sustainability regarding language projects. And so, yeah, so if you're doing any type of native language-based project, that's what's going to be taking place on the 21st instead of this ancillary organization webinar. And that's it. We have one last question from Rita before I wrap it up. How can we ask a question we think of after this webinar is over? Yeah, you can just you can email matt@ka'anani'au.com. Yeah, I'm not sure if info will work. matt@ka'anani'au.com, or you can call that number up there. That's our office. Or just reply to the email that we're going to send out at the end. So you can just reply to that email with your questions. And in that email, we'll also have a place where you can suggest topics for future webinars. And so if there's anything that you'd like us to address, you can add that into a box that will be in our online survey. And so just click on the survey. There's like 3 questions, and at the bottom there's a box where you can suggest topics for future webinars. And we really do use that when we plan our calendar, so please take advantage of that. And so thank you again for joining us in today's webinar. I'm going to stop the recording, and once again, this recording will be available probably in about 2 weeks on the ANA website. So mahalo.